Thrusters on full. Sounds a lot dirtier when there's not the beeps and whistles everywhere, and the blinding lights. Hi there, this is Matt with State of Flux, here with a review for Star Trek, the 2009 J.J. Abrams movie. And what J.J. Abrams brought to this franchise, and this film specifically, is the characters from Star Trek, but the energy and the action from Star Wars, as well as the set pieces from Serenity and maybe some of those beautiful lens flares, and then the heart from Lost. You know, and speaking of those lens flares...
I'm going to bed. Good night.
Thank you. That my wife, everybody. She helped out with the lens flares. I appreciate. Anyway, so Star Trek 2009 is actually a movie I really quite like, even though it doesn't really distinctly feel like Star Trek traditionally. This is much more of an action movie. This is much more of an emotional response movie. This is something that feels, in essence, very much like a J.J. Abrams movie. And, you know, the criticism can be laid that this is just kind of a retread of Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope, in the sense that it follows a blonde-haired, blue-eyed farm boy who's chasing into the stars after his father, who died before he was born, and encounters a person who knew him quite well when, in the past, this time it's Spock, who is trying to stop a planet-destroying weapon that can, you know, erase all of existence should it fall into the wrong hands, which of course it does. This sounds very much Star Wars, but that's not necessarily a criticism. There was a certain level of staleness that had hit, particularly those last couple of Next Generation movies. And weirdly, the movie that this film, I think, borrows stylistically the most from is Star Trek Nemesis. But he took what worked and kind of jettisoned what didn't, and brought in the Star Wars of it all to really round it out. What this film does well is that very first thing I mentioned, which is characters. The characters of Star Trek are preserved, and they feel authentic, at least to some extent. This is kind of the best case scenario that we could have gotten when we had heard that there was going to be a reboot of Star Trek. They were going to start over, they were going to recast. William Shatner would no longer be Captain Kirk. Leonard Nimoy would no longer be Mr. Spock. And I think there was an uproar, and a kind of deserved one. How do you recapture the magic of that casting? How can anybody possibly be Captain Kirk? Because anytime you get somebody who tries, all that you're going to accomplish is a parody of William Shatner's unusual cadence. And that's not what this film did. This film kind of alleviated a lot of those things. And I think another major thing that people were afraid was going to happen was he's coming on board and they're just going to give us a repackaged Wrath of Khan. Stay tuned for that next week. But that isn't what we got. We got a character piece, a really firm grounding into who Captain Kirk was and how he came to be. But they did the same thing for Spock, for Uhura, for, to a lesser extent, the rest of the characters. Bones, Scotty, Chekov, Sulu, they're all there. They kind of take a sideline. The film really focuses its energy on Kirk, Spock, and Uhura. But everybody has a moment to play. Everybody has their moment where you see how they became the character that you know and love. And everybody's relatively believably there, some more than others. Close your eyes, Karl Urban is Bones. He matches the voice work of DeForest Kelley. He just does an absolutely perfect job. You open your eyes and he's ridiculously too good looking for the role, and doesn't really have the, as my friend described it, orangutan eyes of DeForest Kelley that you can't really match, but I digress. He was so perfectly cast that was like, that got me on board. And I remember reading who was cast in these roles ahead of time, and the only one I really had much familiarity with was Zachary Quinto from Heroes and John Cho from the Harold and Kumar and American Pie movies, and I was like, that's interesting. But I like what John Cho does with Sulu. It's not the same Sulu, to a certain extent, something that got criticized by George Takei himself, and maybe I'll circle back to that. But I really like what he does with Sulu, and how you can see how this is a Sulu that will be on a trajectory to captaincy, which Sulu, of course, eventually did by the 6th movie. I like Shaun of the Dead. What's his name? Oh God, his name actually has escaped me. Simon Pegg. Simon Pegg is fun as Scotty. A little over hyper. I think I would have played it a little more serious, because he was always a little more serious when James Doohan played him. But I like what he's doing in this film. Anton Yelchin, R.I.P., is really good as Chekov. I really like what he does. He doesn't have a lot to do in the movie, but it's good when present. I really liked Zoe Saldana with her performance as Uhura. She is great, and they gave her something to do, far more so than any of the prior movies really had done. And I liked that, and getting to know her a little bit more. Boy, she had a breakout year. This was the same year as Avatar as well. So she really kind of came on board. And the only thing I'd ever seen her in was the Spielberg movie The Terminal, where she has a small role. But she is really good in this as the communications expert. And you get that intelligence and that wry slyness that she has about her, that you can see channeling Nichelle Nichols. But the people who own this movie are absolutely Chris Pine and Zachary Quinto. You get those two performances wrong in any way, and your movie completely falls flat. And if you don't want to take my word for it, just watch Solo, A Star Wars Story. Aaron Hart, what's his name? Oh God, I'm terrible with names today. The kid who played Han Solo in that movie. He's a fine actor. I've seen him in plenty of things that I really like. I think he's a great actor. He just isn't Han Solo. And if you don't have your Han Solo in your Han Solo movie, the movie falls completely flat. That was the danger that this film had. Zachary Quinto looks enough like a young Leonard Nimoy, and he gets the passionate, there's a passion in how Leonard Nimoy speaks, even though he is delivering things kind of sternly and flatly and matter-of-factly. It's not flat, it's matter-of-fact. Everything is absolute when he speaks. But there's like a passion that you can read behind that, and I think Zachary Quinto really catches that. But for me, Chris Pine makes this movie. He is absolutely phenomenal. And he doesn't necessarily, parody Shatner in any way. There's a couple moments where he kind of, purposely and willfully hits those Shatner lines right at the very end of the movie when he's like, "Bones!" is a perfect example of that. But he channels Shatner. That swagger is ever present. And he said that he kind of based his performance not only on Shatner, but bringing a little bit of Han Solo to it. And you can see that. There's a cocky confidence of being sure you are doing the right thing, even though you have no idea necessarily what you are doing. And that's great. They captured these characters with these great actors, but the characters on the page read very much as an origin story for them. You get where they're coming from. The problem, though, is the movie sometimes goes for comedy when it shouldn't, and this is in a time that's kind of even predating the complaints that, the MCU gets hurled at with, their use of bathos. Which is humor that undercuts a sincere moment. almost every character has, like, it demonstrates complete competency for their role, but there's always a scene for every one of those characters where they undercut it for the sake of humor. Like when Kirk first gets on the shuttle pod that's going to take him to the Enterprise, or to Starfleet or whatever, he turns a corner and hits his head on like one of the bars. Like, why? Why is that there for your main character captain? It's not necessarily even really funny, and it's just like, you kind of made him look like a buffoon just to make him look like a buffoon, which was a joke that was also kind of stolen from Star Trek V, and most people hate that moment. But I digress. Like Chekov, when he can't say his W's properly, and he's sinking his teeth into those V's, and like it's played for comedy, but he kind of looks incompetent for the job. The fact that Sulu can't take the ship out because he still has the parking brake on, and Spock has to teach him how to fly the ship, even though this is Sulu. Things like that really kind of do irk me a little bit. And if I could just have a second pass at this movie, what I would do, because I think it's a near perfect film, is take out those little nonsensical beats of what's supposed to be humor, but it's damaging to the characters at hand. There's quite a bit of humor in this that works without damaging the characters. Keep that stuff in. My problem isn't with the humor, it's with humor at the sacrifice of moments and characters. If you release those moments from this film, it's much, much stronger. The only one I would definitely keep in is the incompetency of Spock as captain when he is being governed by his passion. That works towards character, and also kind of answers a age-old question that a lot of Star Trek fans have echoed, which is, why the hell is Spock not captain of the ship? Kirk is a wild card. You don't know what he's going to do. You do know what Spock's going to do, and it's always going to be dedicated towards the Prime Directive, until it's not. But, it just is one of those, like, what's going on? This movie kind of has an answer and resolution for that, and it works for me. And I didn't mention, but I love Leonard Nimoy's presence in this film and passing the baton, which is something that is a tradition amongst the Star Trek franchise up until the most recent incarnations of it. You always had somebody from the past come back to usher in the old. You had the original series, which gave way to the films, and then Next Generation. But in that first episode of Next Generation, who shows up is Bones to pass the baton. Next Generation had passed the baton on to Deep Space Nine, who then did the same for Voyager. Film-wise, you had Kirk coming in for the first Next Generation movie. For Enterprise, you had Zephyr Cochrane from First Contact come on board that show. Here, it makes perfect sense that if you're going to do a time travel story where Spock would still be alive, why not utilize Spock in that story so we get a tale of two Spocks? And that is great, because you do get to see the juxtaposition of character, how much he has grown for a character that we are being thrust back and seeing what he was much more similar to in his first season incarnation of the original series. And I like seeing that. It's great, and like, hot damn, Nimoy gives a profoundly good performance in his handful of scenes. He has such a strong presence in this film, even though he has like maybe 9-10 minutes of screen time, but you think of him as one of the main characters, and that's all owning to his greatness. The film does have a few other areas that play less well for me. The biggest issue at hand is the Lens Flare City was obnoxious as shit, and thankfully something they toned down in the second one, and then by the third one it's like palatable use of lens flares. But that was something that I'd seen and was quite popular with one of my favorite TV shows and my favorite movie, Serenity. Lens flares add this really neat visual style. But this is an excellent example of knowing when to use a tool. It's alright if you have a light kick and bring a lens flare. It can add dynamic moment to your shot at hand that looks really quite interesting and neat. But when it's happening constantly, it just becomes distraction, and that isn't something that's worth putting in your film. A common criticism hurled at most films that use computer-generated technology is the over-reliance of it. You have this technology available to you, so you're going to max out its usage, when films that we praise that used it much more minimally, like Terminator 2, still hold up well, and we talk about how well that looks and holds up, and it's because of the minimal use and how it's blended with other forms of artistry to bring a life to the story. Lens flares are an example of that in an interesting way, because, as I say, Serenity and much more in the TV show Firefly, there were lens flares, but that was something that just happened on the day at set, and they were like, well, you know what, that kind of works. It was the type of lens that they were using that was easy to catch the light from the guide lighting that they had around, or from sunlight when they were shooting outside, and they were like, well, it'll add that extra little bit of authenticity to make this world unique in its own. It works. It was natural. It wasn't artificially put in, except for the space scenes. They tried to mimic that. And weirdly enough, if you watch the space scenes in 2009 Star Trek, the space scenes where the artificial lens flares are present work perfectly. It's not a distraction. It is just those like little bits of pop that make the image look interesting. It's when you have somebody that's on set who's literally getting the lens to flare on set that is going overload. This was a choice that was made that looks bad. And there's no way to really take it out inexpensively once you've done it. But yeah, that is one of the biggest issues that I have with this movie. As well as the fact that this has the same issue that Star Trek VI had, which is an inexplicably strange 10-minute side quest on an ice planet. And, like, if you just lift that out, I know that's the scene where we see Spock, but, like, it drives the film dead for a tiny bit. And, like, until we get to meet Spock, I feel like the story could have been rewritten to get Spock and Scotty on board the Enterprise in a much more succinct way than this side quest. Kirk gets jettisoned onto ice planet, has to survive and complain about how mean new Spock is. But yeah. I haven't talked about the villain. The villain in this film, Nero, is really quite strong. Eric Bana plays him, and I really like Eric Bana's performance. This is one of the best Star Trek film villains. He has motivation that's completely earnest and understandable. His planet has been destroyed by the very thing that he's going to use to destroy not only Vulcan, but if he can, Earth and any Earth-friendly territory, till he wipes out the Federation before the Federation can allow for his planet to get destroyed in the future. It's like performance driven by malice, by anger, by revenge, and this need and thirst to get it. And it's fantastic. I absolutely loved his character, and as I say, Eric Bana gives him such a strange and unique accent and cadence with his speech that is so unique. I liked it. I know some people thought it was hammy, but come on, this is Star Trek. Wrath of Khan is the best villain we've gotten. You're telling me hammy? But anyway, I digress. I am a big fan of Nero. The final fight of the film works for me emotionally. I like the scene where Nero is taking on Kirk and is like, I know your face from Earth's past. That whole scene is really good. It sort of harkens in on the fact that this is a big, expansive world. But that's also kind of cutting into the criticism I had of the film at the time. Now, this is a movie that I saw early. I won tickets to see this movie about 3 weeks before anybody else got a chance to see it, which was really cool. I was a big Trek fan at the time, and at the time I still am. Anyway, I was excited. I took my dad and we went to see this movie, and I came out and I was really disappointed. What I saw then as a slight to the franchise, I see now as a boon for making this story and other stories within this world work. Which is, at the time, I saw that they had created a time flux where they went back in time and did an erasure of the entire franchise as I knew it. And I took that as like a personal loss. That like, okay, now because this movie happens, Star Trek doesn't happen, Next Gen doesn't happen, none of the original 6 movies happen. You know, some of those might be for the better. None of the Next Generation movies happen, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, all of it is erased because of this weird singularity in time that Spock Prime creates and goes back in time to kill accidentally Kirk's father, and Nero's involvement in all of that. And I was like so like taken aback that a franchise would allow this to happen, to erase everything. But now I see it as I always should have seen it, which is there's multiple timelines within Star Trek. There always have been. And we've seen parallel universes, mirror universes, all that kind of stuff. This is a new timeline, but it doesn't make any of the other stuff less so. And it wasn't until I didn't want to see this, but a second time, but my friends hadn't seen the movie, which I got to see in advance. So they all, I think some of them already had like midnight showing tickets, so I did too. I went with them, and I brought my wife, who is by no means a Star Trek fan in any way. And within the first 10 minutes, I saw the movie new. I didn't see it as an affront to my fandom. I saw it as a fresh start for more stories to tell, using these characters. And within those first 10 minutes, my wife turned to me and she like had teared up at the scene where Chris Hemsworth had passed away. And she was like, I didn't know this was Star Trek. And by the end of that movie, she really liked it. She was a big fan. That fandom has dissipated over the years. Damn it. But yeah, that was kind of a neat moment for me with a slight personal victory. But rewatching it that second time, I did enjoy myself, and I found more to like. And then I watched it one more time in theaters just to sort of see, okay, one time I didn't like it, one time I loved it, where do I really land on it? And I still landed that I loved it. And it's one that I've watched a couple more times on DVD and Blu-ray and stuff like that. I hadn't revisited it until this past week, since this second movie, Into Darkness, had come out. I hadn't seen it, so in 10 years. And looking at this film 10 years later, I have to say that a lot of it still holds really well. It does have some of the late 2000s, or the late aughts, issues with portrayal of women and making male chauvinism and men using women for jokes and laughs and isn't he cool? That happens a couple times, which certainly dates the movie. but that's not necessarily inauthentic to Star Wars or Star Trek in any general sense, especially of that time. You'd certainly seen it on Enterprise and with Riker's character occasionally on Next Generation, and Kirk, Spock, Bones all seem to have like multitude of women in the original series that they kind of use for that one episode and then never revisit again. So I guess it isn't inauthentic to Star Trek. It's just more glaring in this because of how much energy and focus is on the first like half hour of the movie with that. But what it really comes down to is this is a strong action film. The action really works. The space set pieces are strong. As I say, there's echoes of Serenity quite a bit. The scene where they're in space and all sound drowns out until they hit atmosphere and then sound kind of prickles back in. The lens flares. The final fight between Kirk and the Minion where they're running in and doing like guns blazing is very Star Wars, but then it's happening over this big rotating fan that has like this pit, and the danger of them falling in is exactly from the end of Serenity. Even like the visual language of the way that's shot, but also the way the set is art decorated is very evocative of Serenity. It's just lit more yellow rather than Serenity's blue-gray. But as I say, the action is great. I love the characters. The characters make it work. And if you look at any incarnation of Star Trek, you love these characters. That's why you watch this show. That's why you watch these movies. And this movie did it. It nailed them perfectly. We will address that more in the next episode. I haven't talked about Christopher Pike. I thought that the actor playing him, Bruce Greenwood, is fantastic. He makes the character his own. I like how he is a mentor figure to Kirk and Spock as well. And then I like how they kind of write in his paralysis, which is something that would get carried into the original series eventually. And I like that stuff. It's great. And all the stuff with the Kobayashi Maru, there's a lot of Easter eggs all throughout this film. Some of them work a lot better than others. The Kobayashi Maru, and Kirk's just there eating an apple and being like, yeah, don't worry about it. That whole thing is one of the best, most dynamic moments throughout the entire film. Some of the Easter eggs that work less is the weird, like, time question where it doesn't hold up, with Scotty saying he accidentally teleported Admiral Archer's prize beagle into nothingness. And you're like, wait, wasn't he like 100 years older than Scotty and them? That doesn't necessarily track, but whatever. Yeah. What works, action, character. The only last bit of anything I'll really say is the qualities JJ brought with this film kind of stagnate his career here on after, because I really like what he did with Mission Impossible 3. I think that is probably his strongest film. This is his second strongest film. Then it would be Super 8, and then, Into Darkness, Force Awakens, Rise of Skywalker. With each one, he gets less competent at his job, and it's because he's a voiceless filmmaker. He doesn't really have a whole lot to say. And that's particularly noticeable with this film, being that, as I already pointed out, it is kind of just a rehash of A New Hope. But on top of being a rehash of A New Hope, where was I going with this? Where was I going with this? I turned myself into circles. Oh dear. I'll pull myself back out. We'll pull out of this nosedive. There we go. In being just a rehash of A New Hope, and him not having a very firm or strong voice, you think back about Star Trek, and the thing that separates it from Star Wars is, sure, Star Wars has the action and the fun and excitement. Star Trek does too, but Star Trek is much more intellectually provoking. It likes to give you morality plays, and this film kind of completely lacks that. I was able to set that aside this one time because this is sort of an origin story and it was kind of a new take and stuff, hoping that we would get some kind of moral quandary, intellectually stimulating sequel. But alas, we didn't. What we did get was Star Trek Into Darkness, which I will be talking about next week, so stay tuned for that. But let me know what you think of Star Trek. At the time, I think it was kind of a divisive film, but largely thought of positively. In light of him taking on the Star Wars movies, have you kind of gone back and repainted some of the criticisms you had with this movie in a more positive and or negative light? I think I held JJ in much higher esteem after seeing this movie a couple of times than I certainly do now. And that's because I've seen 10 years of films after this where he hasn't grown in any way. In fact, he just continues to recycle the same one or two films from his childhood and has nothing of value to offer beyond that. And he really should just be a director for hire, which, I mean, ultimately he kind of was, because he doesn't have anything interesting to say. And maybe that's okay when you're not working in a franchise that is designed to say things in an interesting and intellectual way. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe. If you got to the end, let me know in the comments down below. You're going to get a high five next video. I'll give you a shout out. Thanks for watching. Peace.